standards, I think, is pretty average, but that's probably the equivalent of like $120,000 or $160,000 today. So, I went from that point in time working, my butt off to become successful, to be a self-made person, and have learned so many lessons along the way. And part of the reason why I like to share this background is to just sort of dispel the myth that you have to come from a certain environment or that you have to be a certain kind of person to be able to, A, be successful, but also to reinvent yourself throughout the way. So I hope that that puts a little context around, not only where I came from, but just the fact that, anyone, especially in America, anybody who has the fire within them can do whatever it is that they want to do.
Thank you so much, Carol. That is very sort of timely and appropriate for us students. So that's wonderful. Thank you. And I just want to say to everyone that's logged in, if you have questions, we have a live feed on Twitter. That's at TCSOSB. So if you want to, there's someone moderating, our director of marketing. So if you want to ask questions to Carol, you can tweet them. Otherwise, towards the end, we will make some time for questions, and you can just type me a message and I'll unmute you and you can ask it directly to Carol. So Carol, I wanted to ask, what role do you think psychology plays in business and in the professional world? Because obviously you are addressing students who are either doing their master's or their terminal degree, their PhD, and I just wanted to ask you what you think of the world of psychology in your sphere.
I think that psychology is probably, if you understand psychology, it's one of the biggest possible assets that you can have today in business as well as in the professional world, because there are a couple things that set this up. First of all, that people do business with those that they know, that they like, and that they trust. So if you're somebody who not only can get to know people, but can use psychological triggers to understand and create the relationship to make people like and trust you, you're going to be at a huge advantage. Loyalty is also so important today, and I think just being able to get people's attention is so important today. We end up in a world where technology has made it so much easier to reach anybody, but so much more difficult to be able to connect with them. Because of that barrier coming down, because there are so many messages that we're bombarded with each and every single day, that even though you may be able to connect through Twitter, through Facebook, directly through email with somebody, through an advertisement, it's much more difficult to get a share of their brain, because people are so busy, they're multitasking, they're not focused anymore. So as somebody who understands psychology and understands the motivations that people have to pay attention, or how to get somebody's attention, or how to create the rapport, it puts you at such an advantage versus people who just think about business on an old school basis. Because it used to be that if you built something, you thought people would show up. But that doesn't happen anymore. You have to market. It used to be that you would just drop a resume to a company and there would be an orderly process and they would call you back. And it just has gotten so much more difficult to make that connection, that if you can use psychology to influence that connection, to make those connections deeper and more meaningful, then you're going to be the ones who are able to inspire that like and trust. You're the ones who are going to understand how to trigger loyalty. You're the ones who are going to understand the behavior behind why somebody is going to respond to a message, to a sales call, to an inquiry, to a resume. And that is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And so I think that is sort of the basis of having this fantastic connection between the two. And it's something that probably isn't I think that there's not enough time that's spent on it. I mean, I think if I could put in the two buckets of things that are most important in terms of life skills, one of them I would say is accounting, and the other one I would say is a deep understanding of human behavior, with psychology being a part of that. So there may not be that obvious connection, but it's become more and more important in today's world. And I think as you see the competitive landscape developing and further distractions from people, it's going to become even that much more important.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, you're saying that as psychologists, if honed correctly, if we hone our skills correctly, we do have a competitive edge in the workplace.
Absolutely. I think that you have a competitive edge, whether you're somebody who's using psychology within the confines of somebody else's workplace, whether you are owning your own business, whether you're advising a business, or whether you're just trying to get yourself hired. By understanding how people behave, how people respond, and being able to engender that like and their trust, I think that you're really, really ahead of the curve, and that you should embrace that as a complete strength that you're going to have that's going to set you apart from everybody else that's out there.
Okay, so speaking of setting apart, extrapolating on that concept, how would you go about building a network, and why is that important?
So the funny thing about network, well, first of all, let me just say, I feel like in today's day and age, people think the word help is a four-letter word, and technically it is, but it really isn't a four-letter word in that sense. I feel like your network is one of the most valuable things, again, especially in this time when everybody's hearing so much of everything, that can help set you apart. It can help make introductions for you, it can help you get to the next level. I think the challenge with a network is that people tend to try and build a network when they need it, and the focus, or what I want to impart upon you is what you should be doing strategically is building that network before you need it. Because if you wait to build the network until you need something, you haven't inspired that knowledge and like and trust within somebody who wants to be able to help you. So I've got sort of two different approaches that I like to for network building, and I think that psychology plays a very important role in this. So they're kind of related, but I always call the first thing give to get. I'm somebody that likes to create relationships and create that know, like, and trust by giving of myself first before I ask something of somebody else. And I want to be very clear about this. I'm not doing it quid pro quo. I'm not doing it with the expectation that somebody's going to help me on the other side. I'm doing it authentically from a place that I like to help people, but with the knowledge that by doing that, whether you think it's karmically, whether you think it's because of psychological principles, that usually endears people to you, and that they will most of the time be willing to help you, because that's sort of how you build these relationships up. So I've been very successful in building my network by asking people how I can be helpful to them, and then more importantly, actually fulfilling that promise. Because if you ask people, how can I help you, and they give you something and you don't do it, that doesn't inspire a lot of trust, and it probably doesn't inspire a lot of like either. So I'm really a big fan of the give to get principle, and I do think that it plays into something which Cialdini talks about. I don't know if you guys have ever read Dr. Robert Cialdini and the law of reciprocity from his book Influence, but there is this law of reciprocity that when you do things for people, people do feel like they want to help you in return. And I think that there have been all different kinds of studies, including one that they cited where somebody sent out Christmas cards to a bunch of strangers, and they got back almost as many Christmas cards in return just because somebody sent it to them to begin with. So there really is this kind of reciprocal nature out there, and I think that plays into building the network. So if you can take away from this to really focus on building up the network before you need it, really, give to people, be authentic, and then allow them, when you're ready, to be able to be helpful to you, I think that that's really critical. And once you're ready for that help, one of the ways that I like to make it, one of the ways I like to get the help is by making it very easy for people to help me. So being very specific on what they can do, and also not having them jump through a lot of hoops. So for example, when I wrote my book and I wanted people to help me promote it, I was very specific. I said, dear so-and-so, thanks so much for being a great fan of mine. I've got my book, coming out. Wondering if you could help me, and then with a very specific ask, promote it on Twitter. If that's something you're comfortable with, I've written these 3 tweets for you, and all you have to do is copy and paste them at your leisure. So I was very specific on what they did, and then I did the work for them so that all they had to do is throw it into Twitter and promote it. And I feel like if you do those kinds of things, not only have you built up a great network, but you're going to be able to leverage that network. And so, I'm really focused on that, and I want to, again, tie that back to psychology because, again, understanding human behavior, I think that gives you an advantage in terms of not only the give to get part, but the asking for help and being able to leverage the network part as well.
So, Carol, as especially psychologists would say, I feel there's no cognitive dissonance on your part because you're truly you're truly doing and living what you say and what you think. And just an interesting fact for the audience members, when the Online Student Board was sort of getting together the panel of speakers that we'll have in this upcoming academic year, Carol actually requested, because she's addressing university and students, she actually requested that her speaking fee be waived and actually donated that amount of her book, The Entrepreneur Equations, to the TCS library. So there's, in the DC, Chicago, and LA campuses, there are her books, which I just thought was a very amazing and generous gesture. So thank you very much about that. You were speaking about how there's sort of 2 ways of networking. How does positioning yourself as an expert help you in business and in psychology in the professional world?
Yeah, so I feel like we'll use the book as the starting point here. So the easiest thing to say to somebody, whether you're asking them to hire you, whether that you're asking them to work with you, whatever the relationship is, do you want the person who wrote the book or the person who read the book? If you have the opportunity to have the expert, person who wrote a book, the person who wrote an article, the person who is on television, who has some authority conferred upon them, like 99 out of 100 times, you're going to win out in that battle. There's a difference, and I'm assuming that you guys talk about this a lot at school, between perception and reality, and the fact that sometimes perception becomes reality. And that is what happens when you're an expert. I used to joke that even though I had raised $1 billion in capital and had done $750 million in mergers and acquisitions and done all of these wonderful business things, that people weren't impressed until I told them that I had been on television. And then it was like, oh boy, you're an expert. And it sounds completely ridiculous, but it's the way that our culture is oriented. So if you can set yourself up as an authority figure, and the really cool thing is that it's so easy to do in today's day and age because there are so many sources looking for content, looking for information, whether it's blogs, whether it's newspaper outlets, television, video channels, and the like, that if you can set yourself up as an expert and you can let people know about your expert status, that is going to allow you to get a better job, to get higher pay, to get more clients, whatever it is that you're seeking, because you can always come back to that expert status. And I want to actually share a couple of resources with you guys for free that you can do to start getting yourself out there as an expert. One of them is something called reporterconnection.com. So just reporterconnection.com. And it's an email list that you can sign up for. And every day there are queries from different journalists and publications who are looking for experts. And so you can look, and if there's something that comes up that has a psychological angle or something that is within your area of expertise, you can respond. And, you know, sometimes it takes a while, but if you keep doing it, eventually you're going to get people who are interested in running a quote from you or having you write something, and then you start keeping that list that I was quoted here. Another thing you can do is you can reach out to different blogs and online media that, you know, perhaps there's an article that you want to write. Every single site out there is dying for content, and the people who produce those sites really are so busy that most of the time they're thrilled to have good content. So if you write an article, think about where it is that you might like to get that published, and online is the easiest place to start, and contact them. Say, hey, I've got this great article. Would you be interested in some guest content? And then once you have that, then you can include that, whether it's, you know, with your resume for a job. Oh, by the way, this article was published here, or here's a listing of all the places that I've been published. Or if you are, you know, perhaps starting a business, you can list that on your website of, you know, here are all the places that, you know, I've been quoted. And just think about, you know, Anjhula, the credibility that you conferred upon me from being on CNN, being on CNBC, on Fox Business, writing for the New York Times. You know, I didn't start there. I started doing it for smaller outlets, and then use the smaller outlets as credibility to get to the next outlet, and then use that as credibility to get to the next one. And then pretty soon, I'm, you know, very well known as the expert. So every single person has something that they know about and can confer expertise and information on, and can start positioning themselves as an expert. And it's really, really going to set you apart, and it really does create that reality that was a perception to begin with. So I feel like that's a very easy strategy that anybody can start now and really, really leverage.
So Carol, you're speaking about, you know, how to present oneself as an expert, and to obviously not just present, but to gain that expertise in actuality. But tell me, let's talk a little bit about failure. What would you say about the concept of failure, and why do you think it's important?
So failure is so interesting, and you know, I'm sure you guys all have kind of different perspectives on it after studying psychology. But one of the things that's fascinating to me is that we grow up in a culture that doesn't teach us how to fail. In fact, we sort of thumb our nose at failure. When you go through school, if you get an F, that's a very bad thing. Everybody's trying to get an A or a gold star or a smiley face. But the reality is that when you're out and you're learning and you're taking risks and you're trying to grow yourself and your career, you have to be willing to fail. So I think that the first thing is that you have to have that acknowledgement that failure is going to happen, and it's okay. It's not about if you fail. I think it really is about how you fail. And so I always say that there are three things to keep in mind: that you want to fail fast, you want to fail cheaply, and you never want to fail the same way twice. So if you spend your whole life doing one thing and it doesn't work out, that's pretty damaging to you. But if you experiment around and try something and you haven't invested years and years and years of your time into it, then the failure is much more palatable to you. The same thing with money invested. If you put all of your eggs in one basket towards one project and that doesn't work out, again, very, very disturbing and upsetting to you. But if you maybe have a budget and take that budget to try things out, then the failure's not as bad. And then, of course, never failing the same way twice, you want to have the ability to learn from your failures. So if you are continually making the same mistake, that's, I think it's Albert Einstein's definition of insanity, right? That you keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So you want to be able to grow from your failures, understand what it is that you did wrong, and then be able to adjust course. And I think the people who are really successful have started to embrace that ability to fail, to become what I call is become comfortable with being uncomfortable, and understanding that if you try things, that if you really take a stand and you go out on a limb, that you're going to have things that don't work out as planned, and that that's not a bad thing. It just means that you are putting yourself in a place of growth. And they say that there are such things as growing pains, and that growth is uncomfortable, and that's a fact whether you're taking that literally or figuratively. So I think from my perspective, there have been plenty of times when I've had things that I failed at, and it was probably one of the scariest lessons that I had to learn. So you really want to put yourself in that position to fail. And if I can add on to that, I would also say that in order to be able to approach failure, it's very important to have some concrete goals. It's very difficult to know the best way to get somewhere if you don't know where it is that you're trying to get to. So again, trying things out, make sure that they have that lens of moving in the direction of something that's very specific to you. So I think that embracing the concept of failure, embracing the fact that you might have a bruised ego from time to time, but hopefully you don't have a lot more downside from that, is something that's really going to allow you to grow. And I think if you can, get your head wrapped around that and understand some of the psychology of failure, that not only can that help you, but I think it can help anybody that you might be working with, whether it's team members in a corporation or clients or whatnot, that this is one of the biggest challenges that people have in their own personal growth. So really thinking about failure not as a bad thing, but as something that you want to do the right way.
So Carol, we have a question from an audience member, Demetrius. So question for Carol: what trends do you see in businesses today where consulting psychologists can be instrumental in solving business problems?
Well, I think that there are a couple of places, Demetrius, and that's a really good question. When I'm out working with businesses, one of the most important things, or one of the, I guess, the biggest areas of frustration for them is how to get more customers. And whether it's reaching out to a new customer or perhaps getting more business from a customer that already loves them, I feel that that's some place that somebody with a psychology background could add a lot of value. Because I think that everybody's kind of used to the old megaphone approach to marketing and to connecting with customers. So, if I were somebody who had that background, I would go in and talk about the ways that I could really help connect with new potential customers, as well as leverage or gain more from the loyal customers that you have already. So I think that that's an important area. I also think that it's very challenging for organizations to get people who work there to play together nicely. And I think from an internal perspective, employees are another really critical component of business success. So somebody who can come in and instead of taking an outside approach and looking at customers, but maybe take an internal approach to looking at what the dynamics are between the employees and the organization, and how that can be improved to make people happier, to make the employees work more efficiently, and hopefully make the employees make more money. Maybe it's talking about these things like failure with salespeople. Maybe it's talking about relationships between people in different departments who have different objectives, that each one's trying to prioritize their own personal objective when the company is just trying to prioritize what the company wants, which is more profit. So I think that there are tons of different ways that you can be helpful having that psychology background, and that you're just going to have to figure out what your strength is. Are you somebody who wants to be more internally focused? Are you somebody who wants to be more externally focused? And frankly, you may want to go work in a business to understand those dynamics from the business's standpoint, to increase your own expertise, and then layer on your psychology experience on top of that to help you take your career to the next level. So I think that lots of different ways to approach that, and that you just need to figure out what's the best for you, where you see the opportunities, and also where your strengths and core competencies are.
Thank you, Carol. So I just wanted to ask, like, in a nutshell, what would you, I mean, psychology has definitely branched out, you know, from sort of clinical, and there's many, many fields, of course, industrial organization, business psychology. In a nutshell, how would you describe these psychologies? I mean, if you can give some examples, sort of in real time in your field, when you're conducting business or fundraising, some examples. And do you know organizations, for example, that would welcome business psychologists? This obviously plays on the mind of a lot of students who are getting ready to graduate.
Absolutely. Well, I use, and granted, I don't have this psychology background. I have the just, empathy towards human background. But so many times, particularly with small businesses, there are times when you go in to diagnose a business problem, and it turns out it's actually a personal problem with the owner versus an actual business problem. So I do that all the time when I go into an organization and I say, what is it that you have that's going on, and what is it that you're looking to improve, and you start having a dialogue, and pretty soon you realize that it doesn't have anything to do with the business. It has to do with the person, whose wife wants them to make more money, or whose parents told them that I really wish you were a doctor instead of an artist, or those kinds of things. So I feel like there's a huge opportunity to bring some of that perspective, whether on a consulting basis or an internal basis, to businesses of any size. I feel that really almost any organization is going to have room for somebody with a psychology background. And so I think that the key is that you need to learn how to position yourself for what it is that that particular company is working towards, because a lot of times they're not going to understand that that's what it is that they want. They're going to communicate it in a different way. So they're looking for somebody who can help their salespeople sell more. They're looking for somebody maybe who is a salesperson. They're looking for somebody who can get more customers. They're looking for somebody who can help on a human resources perspective, make their employee base stronger. And so from your challenge is to say, what is it that they're looking for, and how do I communicate my skills in a way that's going to resonate with them? And again, having a psychology background, you should be very, very good at doing that. But it's not necessarily coming at it saying, oh, okay, I'm going to look at positions looking for a psychologist, or somebody with a psychology background. It's more of looking for what's the problem that the organization's looking to solve, or what's the position they're looking to fill, and what kind of skills are they looking for, and how can I use my psychology background and the experience I've gained to make sure that I'm the best candidate for that. And so I think that it's really having the perspective to be able to think outside of the box and look at an opportunity in any organization. If, let's say, it's a sales position, and you're somebody who has really deep understanding of the triggers that make people buy, you're going to have a huge advantage over somebody who maybe has just a plain old business background. And so you need to just be able to explain why your deep understanding of somebody's behavior and why they buy what they do and what that is makes you the perfect person for the job. So I would encourage you to look at things that are outside of the box and to be able to communicate that very effectively. Don't paint yourself into a corner, because you can always learn in industry. It's much more difficult to have that underlying skill set.
Thank you, Carol. I just want to encourage, we're sort of nearing towards the last 10 minutes of the webinar. So if you have any questions, just please feel free to sort of chat with me, and inbox me, or tweet, if you will. So Carol, I read your blogs in Huffington Post and New York Times, and I believe you sort of have this theory of spinach in your teeth. Like your sort of ethos is you will approach people or kind of tell them what they probably don't know and other people won't tell them. And I see you on television. I've watched your interviews. You meet very interesting people from all walks of life. With all your wealth of experiences, what to psychology students would you say is the best advice you've ever received?
Well, I'll put it in the context of a story because I think there's an important takeaway and then there's some perspective on the takeaway. So the best advice that I got was when I was in investment banking. It's where I started my career. And if you're not familiar with investment banking, it is notorious for having 16 to 20-hour days, 7 days a week, where you really don't spend much time outside of the office. In fact, I ended up meeting my husband at work because I always said if you work that many hours a day, you have to fish off the company pier. So when I was working like crazy, I ended up putting myself in the hospital a couple of times for exhaustion, and I was just really burning the candle at both ends. And I was working on a project for one of the managing directors there, and he said, oh my God, we're going over this material for a big presentation tomorrow. Carol, this is a marathon, not a sprint. You can't burn yourself out because you have to be able to do this for a long, long time. And if you keep pushing yourself the way that you're doing, you're going to burn out and you're not going to be effective. And if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to give your best to this organization and to our clients. So, why don't you, I'm going through this presentation, why don't you go home after this meeting? And I said, you know what, Carl, that is some really good advice. I think that I need to start putting that more into perspective, having some more balance. But who's going to finish the presentation then? And he said, good point. All right, finish the presentation and then go home. So, the takeaway there is that, yes, you need to have the balance, and you do need to realize that your career is very, very long. And while it's important to be very focused and to work hard, that you also have to take care of yourself and not put yourself into a corner. But the context, the funny part about it is that people will give you advice, but they also care about what's in it for them. And so while he was concerned about my well-being, he really wanted to make sure that that presentation was done first. So you always have to remember that your interests are competing with somebody else's interests as well.
That makes sense. I've conceptually, and I've also heard that before. It's not a 100-meter dash. It's a marathon. So sometimes you might lose the lead in the middle, but it's all about finishing the marathon and winning in the end. So
yeah, and I'll add on to that really quickly too. Is that sometimes during that process you have to take a couple steps back in order to make a big leap forward. So you may be running that marathon, and eventually you may just have to stop, and reassess where you are, going, all right, am I pacing myself correctly? Is there something I can be doing better that you can't figure out if you're still running and running and running? So sometimes you need to stop and adjust course. And I do that with my own business, where sometimes I'll just shut it down for a couple of days or a couple of weeks and, lose out on some clients or some money today in order to figure out the strategy to take it to the next level tomorrow. So be willing to do that as well. You don't always have to be busy. You can take a step back in order to get that momentum to move forward.
Wonderful. Carol, thank you so much. I've enjoyed chatting, and I want to open it up to amazing and very interesting questions that have been sent to me. So if that's okay with you, would you like to field some questions?
I would love the opportunity. It's my favorite thing to do.
We can feel the enthusiasm over the All right. So Miss Cecilia has a two-part question. So the first part is, how can one get ahead of competition when applying for grants or funding for projects? And the second part of that question is, can you ask her what advice she can give to introverts who shy away from the public in order to be successful in the business world?
Let me answer the second part first. So here's the funny thing is that, and you guys aren't going to believe me after this call, but I'm actually a complete introvert. I would never leave my house or get out of my pajamas if that were my choice. Like if that were the way I could set up myself and my success, that would be what I would do. And people who see my personality and see me out there, it's like there's no way But I am so funny like that. I prefer to have one-on-one discussions, versus big crowds of people. If you see me at a networking event, I'm usually the one who sits in the corner and just lets people come over to my table instead of working the room. So I feel like it's one of those things that you can just, you have to come to terms with the fact that you can be an introvert but still put yourself out there. And I think that that's having confidence not only in yourself, but what value you bring to the table. And if you shift the perspective away from you towards helping other people, it makes it so much easier. So for example, if I'm on television or I'm on a call like today or giving another speech, I don't think about it from my perspective on, oh my God, am I going to forget this, or am I putting myself out there? I'm thinking, what is it the other person wants to hear? What does the audience want to hear? So that I can deliver and be helpful to them. And I think if you shift your perspective to helping others instead of thinking about yourself, then it kind of takes away some of that anxiety from being introverted. So I found that that's really helpful. But I think you'll be surprised to find that a lot of the people who have big personalities out there actually are quite introverted. And it's just taking baby steps, doing one thing after the other, and really thinking about the downside, because a lot of times that there isn't a whole lot of downside of putting yourself out there other than the fact that it's just not something that's comfortable to you. And as you do it more often and you get that repetition, I'll say that 3 times fast, you will become more comfortable. So that's the introverted part. On the grants and funding side, I think that there are 2 things that you can do. When I talk about that network that you have, one of the best things that you can do when you have something that's really important to you is to reach out to your entire network and tell them and say, I'm looking to do this grant or to get this funding. Does anybody have any contacts or introductions to this organization, to somebody, maybe it's somebody who's a lawyer that services that organization, or somebody who's friends with somebody who's on the board there. You would not, I cannot underestimate for you how important, or I guess maybe maybe I would say that it is very much underestimated how important these kinds of connections are. And going back to where I started, that the know, like, and trust, if somebody knows you and can make an introduction for anything, even if it's not traditionally part of the process, you will get extra attention, and that's just sort of the way the world works. And you would be surprised, even if you don't think you have a strong network, how 1 degree of separation leads to 2 degrees of separation, leads to somebody who knows somebody who can be helpful to you. So if you can get that grant or funding and find out this organization, is there somebody I know who knows somebody there who can help move me to the top of the pile, that's going to be huge for you. The second thing I think is that expert status. They want to give the money to somebody who is going to be successful. So you need to prove that you can execute, and the more empirical evidence that you can prove that you have been able to execute, and if you have a higher profile, perhaps somebody who might give them something in return, some media attention, that's going to make you a more attractive candidate. So I feel like those 2 strategies are things that you can really use to set yourself apart from other people, and I don't believe that a lot of people do either of those.
Good, solid advice. Cecilia is saying it's excellent, and please thank Carol for her great advice.
Well, Cecilia, it is my pleasure.
Going on to the next question, Cicero has asked if please ask Carol to speak a little bit about her book.
Yes. Well, I guess the question is, what would he like to know about the book? Would he like to know about the content, about the process it took to write it, the process it took to market it, or some of all of the above?
That is an excellent question. So let me wait till Cicero gets back to me on that. In the meanwhile, if you could field a question by Kimberly, which is it, okay, actually, let me keep on track. Cicero wants to know more about the content of the book.
All right, sure. So the funny thing about my book is that the entrepreneur equation, it's not something that I originally had intended to write as a book. I got very how should I say, angry and annoyed at the fact that people were pushing 7 steps to success on people. And I really feel like we all have different definitions of success, and we couldn't possibly follow the same 7 steps to get there. And so as I was researching and all of the bad advice that was out there, I just said, how is it that nobody's talking about this? How is nobody talking about how difficult it is to be an entrepreneur? How come nobody's giving people a framework to look at their own circumstances and goals and objectives and be able to evaluate if something is right for them? How come nobody's talking about some of these secrets? So I just sort of, how shall I say, vomited words on a piece of paper, and about 80,000 words in, I was like, wow, this probably is a book. Is the book consistent with my own goals? Yeah, sure. And ended up making it into a book from there. But I really did, and it's funny, even though my book was intended to be for entrepreneurs who are looking to start a business, I've been told by many people who are job seekers that it really gave them a framework to be able to evaluate different job opportunities as well, because it's very focused on how do you look at, you know, the mindset that you have going into something, how do you look at the timing and the things that are going on in your life, how do you look at the particular opportunity that's in front of you, and evaluate all of the potential risks and all the potential rewards to figure out if you should move forward with something or if it's the best opportunity for you to be successful. And it doesn't give you the path. It creates that framework for you to put on top of your own life and your own situation so that you can figure out if something makes sense for you. And I haven't checked it today, but the other day, Amazon.com for some reason was having a hardback sale, and the $25 book was selling for $1.50. So I highly recommend you checking out Amazon.com because if you can get it for $1.50, like you might as well, you could probably make a business out of reselling those things. But it's one of those that I really did want people to get a lot of value out of it, and it can be very helpful, even if you're not trying to start a business, and just creating that framework for how you evaluate different opportunities.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
The next question is from Kimberly. Is it, and it concerns something that psychologists think about often, which is perception. Is it necessary for consultants to look like those they seek to help, i.e., African-American females who have chosen to stop relaxing their hair? Will business see this as too ethnic, and do they need to conform with wig straightening to get the business?
Well, I think it depends on the organization, and I think it depends on what other things you've done to build up the brand around you. If you can, let's put it this way, if you can confer yourself as a huge expert on a topic, somebody who's written a book, written a lot of articles, gotten yourself on television, doing anything to confer that status on you, that's going to resonate a lot more with people than necessarily what you look like. But again, people, it's funny, like does attract like, and so, I'm going to be very straightforward with it. If somebody feels like you're not putting forth the brand that is consistent with, the services that you provide or something that's a good fit for their organization, they're going to be more hesitant to it. So I don't think that you have to change who you are. I just think you have to have an awareness about the brand that you create. And then I think that once you create that brand, then it becomes self-selecting, and you want to make sure that you're going after clients who are going to appreciate what you have to offer. Me as a tough love talking female, there are certain organizations where that does not resonate. So it's very self-selecting. People who want yes men or, your gray-haired, older dudes, they're not going to hire me. But there are a lot of people who appreciate somebody who is, young and dynamic and successful and can give you the tough love and has proven expertise in different areas. So I would encourage you to craft a brand around yourself that is consistent and authentic with who you are, and that you feel like, that's consistent with the types of clients that you want to attract. And then you make some decisions on there. From my standpoint, again, I'd rather wear sweatpants all day long if I could, but it goes over a lot better if I get dressed up and put on a pair of heels. So is that consistent with who I am? Yeah, but it's not necessarily my preference. So I feel like that's something that you know, that you just kind of, as you craft your brand and your company and your culture and your values, that you can make some decisions about.
Carol, I think you're one of the only business consultants that I know that, you know, wears a leather bomber jacket with aplomb. So good for you. Kimberly is saying thank you very much. That was very helpful. And you know, probably one of the last questions is, can you speak a little bit more about the Sober Entrepreneur, the book that you wrote?
Oh, just about being a solo entrepreneur?
Nope. The book that you wrote called Sober Entrepreneur.
Oh, Sober Entrepreneurship, yeah. So this was actually a manifesto that I wrote for a really interesting organization called 800 CEO Read. They've got something called Change This, which is really these thought leadership papers. And Sober Entrepreneurship was the whole idea of looking at passion versus opportunity. And I found that people, when they got an idea in their head for something, would sometimes fall in what I would consider lust with it. And lust is never good. It impairs your judgment. And I don't care if it's a steak. I don't care if it's a guy with long hair and a motorcycle. Like, whatever it is that you're lusting after, a lot of times if you're in that emotional place of lust, you're not making such great decisions. So you really have to look at whether it's entrepreneurship or any other idea that you have through a very clear lens, and not what I call business beer goggles, which make something look very good one day, and then you wake up the next morning and go, oh my God, what have I got myself into here? So you really want to have this perspective on it, and so I look at the whole concept of passion versus opportunity. You know, do you start with what your greatest passion is, or do you start with an opportunity and then make sure you're passionate about the opportunity? And I advocate for the latter. I think that, you know, I'll use an example of Zappos.com, which hopefully a lot of you know is an online retailer of shoes. And the CEO there is a gentleman by the name of Tony Hsieh, who's fabulously successful, grew it to a multi-billion-dollar business, sold it to Amazon.com. But when I think of Tony Hsieh, I don't think he was somebody who was passionate about shoes. You know, I think you could go to any department store in the country and find a half a dozen women who are more passionate about shoes than Tony Hsieh. He's focused on things like customer service and building a community and taking care of employees that he is passionate about, but it's not his greatest passion in life. And so that's why I always say, if you want to be successful, find out where that opportunity is, and then make sure it's something you're passionate about, instead of leading with, oh my God, what is it that I'm most passionate about, and trying to find an opportunity. And I think the funny thing is that if you're looking for opportunities, you're probably going to be looking in areas that you're kind of passionate about anyway, because you tend to not spend a lot of time thinking about things that you don't care about. So it ends up being somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy, but I think it puts you in the right mindset to see what that opportunity is, rather than trying to force an opportunity on something that you're passionate about. So it's a nice little manifesto. It's available for free. If you Google Sober Entrepreneurship, Carol Roth, you will be able to download it and read it. It's a very short read, and you know, it gives you a little bit more perspective on the whole passion versus opportunity debate.
Carol, thank you so much. It's very fascinating speaking with you. And the advice, we are going to send all the participants a link to your website and to follow you on Twitter, because obviously your website is a wealth of information of you know, things that you've written, your books, the video. But I think I speak for everyone when I say we're very, very grateful for you to join us. And as president of the Online Student Board, and on behalf of the Student Board, you were the first speaker to kick off our speaker series for this academic year, and I believe they have big footsteps to follow. But maybe next time we will get you live on the Chicago School campus.
That would be yeah, that would be fantastic. And as I say, I like to set the bar high, so let's let everybody try and catch up here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you everybody for joining us. Have a great evening.
Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.